Hello guys, welcome back. Today we're going to describe the muscles that move the scapula, the arm, and the forearm. Okay, again, I have posted this list which contains all the muscles that are going to be covered during this week and the surface anatomy landmarks. I highly recommend to print this template, and as you study each of these muscles, complete the table so you can practice writing the name of the muscle, your spelling, the origin, insertion, action, and innervation in a way that, again, so it's easy for you to study these muscles. So you can group them by actions, by innervations, by common origins, common insertion, whichever way is easier for you. One important part of memory formation and is that after you study, after you set all your knowledge into, all the sensory information gets into your brain, into your cerebral cortex, the best way, scientifically proven and shown, that is the best way to retain or to put those concepts in a more superficial layer in the, let's say, in your memory, so it's easier to remember, is to take out from your brain whatever you learn and put it in a paper or draw it or teach it or say it. That's why I have included so many of these activities in my courses. So you need, after the information gets into your brain, now you need to take it out, say it to somebody, teach it to somebody, write it in the table, draw it. And that way, that information is going to stick, guaranteed. Okay, so let's start describing first the movements of the scapula. For this, we're going to cover the superficial muscles of the anterior and posterior surface of the thorax. Now, all of these muscles have, if they're going to move the scapula, they need to attach to this bone, okay? So just to remember, the scapula, your shoulder blades for others, is located in the posterior surface of the scapula. So what are the possible movements? This first slide is just a review. What are the possible movements of the scapula? Let's see. We can elevate the scapula, right? We can depress the scapula, putting it down. What else? We can protract the scapula when you move it and in the anterior plane. I'm gonna repeat that one. Can I? Well, pay attention during protraction of the scapula that it both scapulas separate. Okay, so we call that movement abduction of scapula as well. So protraction or abduction of scapula, they're synonyms. Okay, now in the next movement, which is the opposite movement, the antagonist movement, retraction is the opposite. So in retraction, we're going to move both scapula together. Okay, so this is adduction of the scapula. These are my two scapulas. Adduction, abduction. Retraction, protraction. Let's see retraction. So that's retraction. See that both scapulas, or the scapular, if the other one is moving, is they're moving closer together. Now this movement, this is the fourth movement, which described elevation, depression, laterally, protraction, retraction. Now we're going to describe upward and downward rotation of the scapula. Now understand that this is not a movement that we can isolate. This movement happens as we abduct the arm. Okay, so when you abduct the arm, see that the inferior border of the scapula down here moves laterally, swings laterally, okay? So like raising this angle of the scapula. That's the upward rotation. And the downward rotation is just bringing down or bringing back that angle towards the anatomical position. So let's see those movements. So that's upward and that's downward rotation, okay? Now, you can pause it, rewind this video and look at those movements again. But I need you, before going on into this lecture, that you have mastered those movements, okay? Now, let's describe the muscles on the anterior thorax, okay? And I have, look who I brought here. Come on, guy. Okay. Let me put it here maybe. Okay, so we can see the table, the muscle table, the one that I want you to complete, and this cool app. Okay, muscles, muscular system Pro 3, I think is the name of the app. Okay, so in here we're going to describe the muscles that are located in the anterior aspect of the thorax that are attached to the scapula, and they can perform one or any of those movements that we just described. In here we're going to describe Pectoralis Minor, Serratus Anterior, and Subclavius. See that all of them originate on the ribs, somewhere at the ribs. And Pectoralis Minor and Serratus Anterior, they go from the ribs to the scapula, okay? So let's see the actions of those muscles. So first of all, this muscle in here, this is the most superficial layer. We just remove the skin and subcutaneous tissue. That's the first muscle that we will see, the Pectoralis Major, which is not included in this table. I'll describe it later. So I'm going to remove Pectoralis Major, and I can see this deeper layer of muscles. Now, this one that originates in, see, this is rib 1 and 2. This is the third, the fourth, and the fifth rib. And from there, it goes to the coracoid process of the scapula. Now, this is the insertion, this is the origin. Remember, insertion moves towards the origin. When the insertion moves towards the origin, what can I do? I bring the coracoid process towards an anterior plane, right? And how do you call that movement? Protraction, okay? Let's see if it makes more sense in here. Okay, this is the insertion in the coracoid process, and this is the origin, right, of the Pectoralis Minor. Can you see the muscle? This is the muscle. Now, if I move this insertion towards the origin, see, I'm bringing the scapula to the front, and that movement is called the protraction. Now, I can remember origin sometimes can act as insertion and vice versa. If I keep fixed the coracoid process attachment, and now this is my origin, and the attachment of the ribs are the insertions, in this case, I can elevate the ribs. So it can aid in respiratory movements, okay, with the scalenes and diaphragm. Now, innervation is given by the pectoral nerves. So what will happen if we damage the pectoral nerve? Okay, that's for class discussion. Serratus Anterior. Let's see the Serratus Anterior. I'm gonna put this a little bit like that, so we can see the origins on the ribs. Look that we have one. Let me see if I remove the Pectoralis Minor. Perfect. I removed the Pectoralis Minor so we can see the entire Serratus Anterior. And I have here the first rib, second, third, fourth, fifth, seventh, eighth, ninth. Okay, the thing is that it originates at the ribs in 8 muscular slabs. This is the first one, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. I think I counted wrong. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This one has 9. Well, it's just 8. 8 muscular slabs. That's the origin. Now, look at this. Follow the muscle. Look at the muscle. Keep your eyes in the muscle. Keep your eyes in the muscle. See, this is the posterior surface of the muscle. And see how it goes from anterior to lateral to posterior and attaches on the scapula. But see that you agree that this is the posterior surface of the scapula. And you cannot see the serratus anterior. Serratus anterior inserts in the anterior aspect of the scapula, specifically in the medial border. This is a very important muscle that I want you to show you individually so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, this is the origin of the serratus anterior on the ribs. Look how it moves laterally and posteriorly to insert. See, this is the anterior aspect of the scapula. Anterior, so we are in between the ribs and the scapula, okay? And right there in the medial border of the anterior surface of the scapula, that's where that muscle contracts, okay? So it's a muscle located between the, what did I do in here? Okay, between the scapula and the ribs, right there. So what it does, what do you think it does? Well, insertion moves towards origin. Maybe this, it will help me. Insertion moves towards the origin, right? So I'm moving the medial border of the scapula towards the anterior aspect of the ribs. So what I'm doing in there, right? Serratus anterior is the prime mover of protraction. Pectoralis minor is only a synergist, but the prime mover is the pectoralis anterior, the serratus anterior performing protraction of the shoulder. It also does something very interesting when during upward rotation of the, during abduction of the arm, the serratus anterior brings the inferior angle of the scapula laterally. See? And that is called the, remember, upward rotation of the scapula. Okay, so I don't have that movement in here, but I show you that in the previous slide, so go back if you need to. So protraction, upward rotation of the scapula. That's why we call this muscle the puncher, okay? Or the boxer's muscle, because of those movements, okay? Raise or upward rotation of scapula and protraction of scapula. Those are the movements that you do when you're punching somebody. Innervation thoracic nerves. Now, the subclavius, look at the subclavius right in here. This is, I'm gonna add a layer because I don't see it in here. Okay, it goes, remember, the origin of all of these 3 muscles is on the ribs. And this one is in the first rib, subclavius under the clavicle. That's where it inserts, under the clavicle. The important action of this muscle, honestly, is just to stabilize the pectoral girdle and depress the clavicle while we are performing all of the movements that we just described. And the innervation is very easy. The subclavius nerve innervates the subclavius muscle. The pectoral nerve innervates the pectoralis minor. So the only one that makes maybe not too much sense is the thoracic nerves that are in the thorax innervates the serratus anterior. Okay, so let's go to the next set of muscles. And now we're going backwards. We're going, not backwards, we're going back into the posterior surface of this gentleman. Okay, And we're going to describe the muscles, the posterior muscles of the thorax that attach to the scapula and can move it, okay? In here, we're going to describe 4 muscles, not 3, which are actually 3. See? Trapezius, levator scapula, and rhomboids, minor and major. Now, let's start with the trapezius. Oh, isn't that a beautiful muscle? That's a humongous muscle. Look in here in the posterior. It's the most superficial and superior muscle of the back of your back. So originates somewhere here in the occipital bone, in the occipital protuberance, and also originates in the spinous processes of the last C7, the last cervical vertebrae, vertebrae prominent, and all the thoracic vertebrae, all the spinous processes, all the way to T12 in here. So you can see that, and the insertion is in the spine of the scapula and acromion and anteriorly to the clavicle. So you can see that the trapezius fibers follows or has several directions, right? We have the superior trapezius, the fibers descend or they go down to insert in the acromion, spine of the scapula and clavicle. The middle trapezius, the fibers run horizontally, and from this origin in the inferior fibers of the trapezius those fibers ascend to attach to the spine of the scapula, acromion, and the lateral third. Let me show you the insertion on the clavicle. See, in here is inserting into the spine of the scapula and acromion, and in here in the clavicle. Let me show you here. In the lateral, this is trapezius, so in the lateral third of the clavicle. So with so many directions of fibers, or the fact that this muscle the fibers of this muscle have so many different directions, we have different movements that we can perform with this muscle. Remember, we can activate, isolate certain fibers of the muscles, okay, and block the other ones or inhibits the other one in order to produce smooth movements, okay? So the superior fibers of the trapezius can, what do you think it can do? Okay, insertion and origin. They move towards the origin so we can elevate the scapula. But we can depress it too, because in here we have more origins, right? And if these fibers contract, they can move or pull the scapula down, and that's depression. But also we have another origin in here, right? And if the insertion moves in this direction towards the origin, what can I do? I can square my shoulders, right? And that's bringing the two scapula together posteriorly, and that's called retraction or adduction, ADD, of the scapula. What else? Well, and this is a synergist movement, while the deltoid is abducting the arm, and the serratus anterior in here is swinging the angle of the scapula laterally, right? The trapezius is also pulling this superior angle of the scapula is pulling it up. See, so you have the continuation there of the movement. Innervation, you know this, accessory nerve, the 11th cranial nerve, the same one that innervates the sternocleidomastoid. So if you remember from your lecture, the 11th cranial nerve originates from the spinal cord. Okay, it's located about here, and it gives branches to the trapezius muscle and to the sternocleidomastoid. What will happen if we damage that muscle? I wonder. Now, next muscle is the levator scapula. I'm going to remove trapezius so I can see deeper to that, the levator scapula. And levator is like elevator, right? Elevates the scapula. Can be easier than that. So where do you think you're going to find a muscle that can elevate the scapula? Certainly not down here, because you know when you pull it, you're going to bring it down. Not in the lateral border of the scapula, because when you pull it, you're going to abduct the scapula or protract it. Not medially, because when you contract a muscle in here, you're going to retract the scapula, right? Or adduct the scapula. But you are going to find this muscle, of course, attached in somewhere superiorly so you can elevate it, okay? And here is where this muscle is. This is the levator, the scapula. So originates somewhere in the cervical vertebrae from C1 to C4, the transverse processes of C1 and C4. That's the origin. And see that this is the spine of the scapula, as you remember. It only inserts in the medial border, but superior to the spine of the scapula, right there in that corner, okay? So when you bring the insertion towards the origin, you can elevate the scapula, right? That's easy. Now, levator, I'm gonna tell you that later. Okay, let's go. Oh, sorry. Innervation. Well, we're in the posterior portion of this scapular area, so dorsal scapular nerve, okay? That's the innervation. Now let's describe the rhomboids, okay? And I'm going to describe them together because they have pretty much same actions, same origin and insertion, and hence the same actions. So we have two. Rhomboid minor is superior. Let me put here minor is this one on top, and major is this one in the bottom. And this applies to every muscle of the body where we have a minor and a major. Minor on top, major on the bottom. Now, the origins of both rhomboid minors and major, it's somewhere right here in your cervical and thoracic vertebrae. The spinous process is, let me see here, C7 to T1 and T2 from T5. These are the origins. And the insertions are both in the medial border of the scapula, okay? One on top of the other one. So what do you think you're going to perform when you move this insertion towards the origin? What you're going to do? You're going to retract the scapula, right? And if you contract both at the same time, you're going to squeeze your shoulders together, right? Your shoulder blades together. That's the movements or the actions of the rhomboid minors. Now, a major. Look that levator scapula, rhomboid minor, and rhomboid major, the three of them can aid to once the scapula is upward rotated, so the angle is in here. If I have the scapula in here, okay, so it's elevated, the arm is adducted, and the inferior angle of the scapula moved from here to here. To bring it down, that's a downward rotation of the scapula. I have both rhomboids and the levator scapula. They can pull the medial border of the scapula towards the midline, bringing back to the anatomical position the scapula. And that movement is called downward rotation of the scapula, okay? All of these muscles, the levator scapula, and both rhomboids are innervated by the same nerve, dorsal scapular nerve. Okay? So let me hide my, thank you very much. I'm gonna hide you a little bit. So reviewing, let's summarize all of this. In here we can see elevation and depression of the scapula. If we retract the scapula, we move both the scapula closer together, so that's also called adduction, DD. If we abduct the scapula, we separate the scapula, that is called protraction of the scapula. This is upward rotation. See that the angle of the inferior angle of the scapula moves laterally. See, it swings laterally and occurs during arm abduction. So that's upward rotation, and when you bring your arms down, when you adduct your arms, you move the inferior angle of the scapula, move to the original position, and that's downward rotation. So the muscles. These are all the muscles that we covered in this slide, okay, from your list, and these are the movements that we described. So elevation of the scapula is performed mainly by levator scapula and the superior, here, levator scapula in here and the superior fibers of the trapezius, okay? Then we have depression of the scapula. And depression of the scapula usually happens by gravity. But if it's against resistance, well, we have the inferior fibers of the trapezius and the serratus anterior and pectoralis minor help during this movement. Protraction of the scapula. Are we going to find protractors, muscles that move the scapula anteriorly in this image? No, right? We have to see an anterior view. So protractors of the scapula are the pectoralis minor and the serratus anterior, which is the prime mover, serratus anterior, and pectoralis minor is just a synergist. Then what else? Retraction. Well, retraction, we're going to find them, these muscles, on the posterior aspect of your thorax, and we have both rhomboids, rhomboid minor, rhomboid major, and the middle fibers of the trapezius, okay? Upward rotation, remember, we are going to move the inferior angle laterally, okay, during arm abduction. So in here we have the serratus anterior, that's the main or the prime mover of these movements, but also at the same time serratus anterior is moving the inferior angle towards or laterally. The superior fibers of the trapezius is pulling immediately this angle of, or the spine of the scapula is pulling up. So downward rotation, it's a movement, it's bringing back from or it's the reverse movement from upward rotation. So we're going to bring down or adduct the arm and adduct the scapula to the original position or to the anatomical position. Usually this happens by gravity, but if it's going to be performed against resistance, well, we have all of these muscles in here. We have both rhomboids and the levator scapula to pull the scapula back into the original position. Lastly, in here in this image, we're going to see the subclavius. Remember, there is only stabilizing the pectoral girdle and depressing the clavicle because it's underneath the clavicle during all of these movements. I hope this was helpful. See you in the next video. We're going to describe now the muscles that are crossing the shoulder joint. Okay? See you later, alligators.